Hello and welcome to another special edition with Justice Watch. We are here with our very own host, Attorney Zulu to talk about his new When the Jury, Money Votes, and Pride Come Black. You know, you talk about the main premise and the overarching theme being the fact that if African Americans don't align behind a collective strategy, they will never be able to achieve social justice in a way. Can you really expand on those four fundamentals that you talk about and what it is that this collective strategy entails?
Yeah. Well, the four things that I focused on is, of course, the jury, money, votes, and I used the word pride. And I kind of initially was going to use the word value, but I believe that value and pride can kind of be used simultaneously. And those four areas, I believe that as a collective group, that it's only by focusing on those four areas that I believe that we're going to be able to achieve the appropriate degree of success in this country. I mean, clearly, we've seen it for, 4 centuries of African Americans actually being subjected to consistent injustice and cruel treatment. We've, I go and kind of give a summary throughout the book, the historical context as to how we've gotten to this time period right now and how you're still seeing the same thing in many ways. And so initially when I talked about the issue, and I'll begin by the issue of the jury system and jury, which has been something that I've been focusing on, and we've had our meetings, we talk about it all the time on the radio about the significance of the jury system and how the jury system is really the very underrated aspect of the criminal justice system. And that's kind of we continue to go through this thing year after year after year. We saw it from when we started seeing these police beatings on camera, which we can go all the way back to the issue of the Rodney King beating, which was caught on camera. And as we're going through now, because of technology and everybody having the cell phones, we're seeing these things, live of people just getting beat down by the police and killed, for no reason. I mean, we've had this, the recent issue that we had just recently in Milwaukee, where the gentleman was shot 7 times in the back by police in front of his children. Yeah. We had the George Floyd situation that just wasn't, maybe a couple of months ago. So and everybody wants to know, what do we do? How can we change this situation? How can we make the system become accountable? A lot of the focus obviously has been on police reform, which is important, but in the same token, I don't believe reallocating funds to law enforcement and reforming the police, or even the whole idea about the immunity issue, about police officers being immune oftentimes to liability. Yeah. The one thing that I think is the main key is our jury system. And I think the reason why you hear there's never a discussion about it because people don't see it. Yeah. It's one of those things where police officers are easy to attack, but every time an individual is shot in the back, every time an individual is beat down, that is really not really that officer himself. That is really just basically a reflection of the entire system. And when I talk about the entire system, it begins with lawmakers. You have judges, you have prosecutors, you have juries, you have all these aspects of the system that leads up into that point. As long as those other elements of the criminal justice system are not held accountable, officers on the street are definitely not going to be held accountable, right?
Fair enough,
And so, what I try to do is try to explain the whole idea of the jury system, and trying to relate what happens on the street as far as police officers and their contact with individuals in the street back to really what happens in the court. I think that in most people's mind there is actually that disconnect. How do you relate the fact you have police officers beating down the individuals in the street, then you have an unjust court system? How do they relate to each other? How can one have any effect on the other? And it's all about accountability, right? In other words, police officers do on the street what they do because they get the wink and the nod from the criminal justice system.
yeah.
That's why. I mean, if the majority of the individuals who are arrested end up being convicted, whether it's by plea or by the jury system, without any question from the police officers, then it's going to continue to happen. There is the justice system has always treated police officers with kid gloves. There is a presumption within our justice system with judges and prosecutors that whatever the police officer does or whatever he says, it's going to be taken as true. And so the only way that you're going to be able to put a mechanism in place within the justice system that's going to change that is, first of all, how do you stop people from, I mean, in other words, if people are primarily taking pleas, then once someone is arrested, it stops there. Because there's really is no really judicial or court procedure that is going to overlook what happened in the street.
Yeah.
And so when you begin to start looking at a jury system, which there's 12 individuals who are who make a decision, if you take the matter to trial. Now, keeping in mind, as I address in the book, most people do not take cases to trial because most juries are white, most defendants are black and Hispanic, and white jurors are more likely to convict black and Hispanic people, whether they're guilty or not, just because of the differences in their understanding and experiences with the system.
Yeah.
The way the system is supposed to work, our system of justice in this country, which is the most important concept of the American criminal justice system, is the presumption of innocence. So if you have a defendant that is presumed, if you're going to presume someone is innocent, there's two other things that you have to presume. One is you have to presume that the police arrested the wrong person. Number two, you have to presume that the prosecutor is trying to prosecute the wrong person, right? If you don't presume those two things, then you cannot realistically presume this person to be innocent. So most white Americans have a completely different idea of how they see the criminal justice system and see police.
Yeah.
Most white people trust the police. Most white people believe that it's unlikely that police officers are going to mistreat people of color or anybody, period. And they believe that, most police officers, or if not all police officers, and the court system is just a good, honest system, right? And so, if you believe that, the presumption, that belief and the presumption of innocence cannot exist in the same space.
Yeah.
It's just not even rational. You cannot, on one hand, believe that it's completely unlikely that they would arrest somebody who's innocent. And it's completely unlikely that the court would try to prosecute an innocent man. Then how can you really presume this person to be innocent. They just don't exist. Whereas African Americans, on the other hand, have a completely different ideology about police officers and the criminal justice system because that's their reality.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's not a matter of saying white people are necessarily bad people, but it's their reality.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And if it's their reality that these things happen, and you happen to be an African American who happens to be innocent, but you have an all-white jury that has a completely different reality than you do, then how is it likely that you're going to be presumed innocent by these individuals that are going to have a different reality than you, right?
Yeah.
Some may say that that's a reverse racist concept, because the same presumption that you have about white people may be, the complete opposite. But we also have to recognize that we do have biases. See, that's the whole point. The whole point is that we as human beings have biases.
Yes.
Oftentimes, the difference between, at least from my perspective, people of color and white people is that sometimes the realization that the biases exist. See, the worst person to have in the criminal justice system are people who do not acknowledge their biases. You know what I mean? You can never work on something unless you don't realize that it exists.
Yeah.
So at least from that perspective of the jury system. So if we're to somehow have some sort of jury reform that allow for African Americans and anybody, Mexican American, no matter who you are, to have a cross section of people on the jury panel representative of at least mandatory an African American on the jury, then you're going to see a different criminal justice system. You're going to see more police officers being convicted of police brutality. You're going to see more police officers being subject to civil liability. And you're going to see more people taking cases to trial and less people taking plea deals. So you're having all these innocent people who are being convicted of things that they didn't do. We will never get past that issue. We're not going to get past that issue because, that's the humanness of us.
Yeah.
You'll have one person who is going to argue the issue about, when you talk about the innocence of an individual accused, then you'll have somebody arguing, then what about the victim? Where's the justice for the victim? You see what I mean? So it's a never-ending battle, and unless you're able to create that balance, acknowledging that the thing that we have to overcome is the fact that you have people with these inherent biases, we'll never get past it. It's just not gonna happen. So I also talk about collective economics. I think that one of the things that we as Black people have not dealt with or not really focused on is ownership. I think that unfortunately, there was always this belief, and it was really a genuine and a righteous belief, that all we really needed to do as Black people, especially after, the period of Jim Crow, after, Plessy versus Ferguson, where the Supreme Court ruled that separate but equal was constitutional. And then you created this whole Jim Crow system where people felt like, all we needed to do was just integrate into society. And that once we integrate into society, then things are going to be more fair and balanced. And that came about with Brown v. Board of Education. And then the many years after Brown v. Board of Education, where you had the civil rights movement in trying to get governments and individuals to accept that decision and the right for Black people to integrate into mainstream society. When we did that, for example, much of it came about during, the famous Rosa Parks bus boycott. So we felt like, we just boycott. And then once we get an opportunity to sit at the front of the bus, then there's going to be equality, there's going to be movement, and there's going to be progress. However, the problem is, just imagine if instead of boycotting, if they would have bought their own bus company, right? And generate wealth,
Yeah.
right? So in other words, what we've done is we've had two primary things that have happened for black people economically in this country, from a broad perspective. One is we had slavery, right? Uncompensated labor developed the country into the richest nation on earth, right?
Yeah.
Uncompensated labor and unpurchased land.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're in business, you'll know that the biggest expense that a business has is labor,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we'd all be rich if we were able to run businesses without labor. You know what I mean? So that put us in that situation. That was the first thing. Then the second is then we moved into the sharecropper aspect. We became sharecroppers, where we were able to stay on the plantation and make money for the plantation owners, but we were able to keep a little bit for ourselves and have a little bit of freedom. It pretty much we're living in a sharecropping aspect right now. In other words, we're still modern day sharecroppers. If you look at our biggest businesses, some of the, whether you're talking about black television, some of our biggest black entertainment, all these things, they're generally, for black people, we're subsidiaries generally of a larger company where we're making money, but we're giving money to other people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that we have to get out of this mindset of being sharecroppers. The reason why people are in a sharecropper mindset is because there is the fear of independence, that we may not make it. The same mindset where you were, required to depend on your slave master is the same mindset that we have now. We believe we have to have these people in order for us to be successful. People do not come to America to struggle. People come to America because of money. Mm-hmm. If you were broke and didn't have any money in America and you lived out on the street, but you still had the ideas of America, you would not say it's the greatest nation. Mm-hmm. The only reason that we say it's the greatest nation is because there is an issue of the opportunity to make money and to live comfortably, right? And to have some degree of freedom. That's it. And you're going to find very few people who are extremely poor who are going to think that America is the best nation in the world. It's only most of the working class and the upper class that have that ideology. The reason why the America was created was not so that we could be free. Mm-hmm. The European powers sent people here to this colony to do one thing, is to generate wealth for the ruling class. Mm-hmm. That's how it was made, right?
Yeah.
It was only obviously through the whole idea of the American Revolution, but the American Revolution was about money, right? You're pimping me, yeah. Right? We're making all this money and now I'm getting taxed, by the king and the queen. Yeah. We want to keep all our money. So that wasn't because they wanted freedom, it's because they don't want to be pimped. They wanted their money.
We ought to have some sort of economic freedom in order to achieve political freedom. Would you say that they go hand in hand? I know you mentioned a little bit about politics, and that's another element in your book. Do you think that goes hand in hand?
Yeah, politicians are for sale. Why would somebody spend $1 billion to run for an office and they're going to make $250,000 a year? And why do they? It's all about money. In other words, it's kind of like disingenuous to believe that someone gives money to a campaign contribution because they're doing their civic duty.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, give it to the Boys and Girls Club if you really want to do your civic duty. The reason why you give a politician money is because you want to call in a favor.
Yeah.
right? So I think that if you want to understand America, money and race is Lyndon B. Johnson was quoted as saying that if you want to, as long as you can make the lowest white man believe he's better than the highest black man, you can keep your hand in his pocket all day long. And that's what the president of the United States said. So it kind of gives you an idea of how it goes hand in hand. And that's why I say that America is really, it's a pimp game.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it's interesting that you mention it in that aspect, because usually they're seen as dynasties. Points, you definitely make a lot of points that are very simple to understand, and that's really appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to ask, I know you're an attorney,
Mm-hmm.
you're a black man yourself, and you've been through America. What is the American dream in this context? I know that in your book, you do mention that in a way that the American dream has been stolen from the black population.
Right.
Can you expand on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that sometimes what's interesting about slavery, I think the first thing that when you think about slavery is that it's a very interesting thing, especially as it relates to the American system of slavery, which in many ways is oftentimes different than I believe other forms of slavery. In many ways, for example, when you think about early world history and slavery, which comes from actually a European term, but if you put it in context, slavery, other Africans had enslaved other Africans. Europeans had actually been enslaved, in certain parts of, times in history. But oftentimes it's interchanged with any time that someone worked with outside of their community, because the African economy prior to European colonization was based upon tribal economy. So in other words, if I lived, close to the water and I had fish and some other tribe had yams, then we would barter. However, if I was to work outside of my tribe for somebody else, even for compensation, that would be considered to be a slave, because there was no employer-employee relation, in that context. As well as prisoners of war. Prisoners of war were oftentimes seen as slave, and they were, sold or exchanged or whatever, right? So in America, you have to think this. This is the thing in your mind. This is what I like people to think of. Imagine what it took to take an individual who does not want to be a slave, put them on a plantation to work for you. There's no way that you could physically make someone do that. Right? You could not physically do that. The only way that you could do that is that you would have to mentally destroy that individual. You're going to leave this, and not only do you have to mentally destroy that individual, you also have to mentally manipulate everybody around them. So in other words, you have a slave, you can't just beat him. Well, you can beat him, but you have to beat him enough to make sure that he understands he's not a human being and he's not even worthy of it. Then you have to have overseers, white overseers. You have to make sure that the white overseer, who is less than you, understands that he's better than the slave. Because how could the white overseer beat the slave unless he believed that the slave was less than human? How could you, as a human being, have any dignity and respect in your community or by your neighbors or by your family for doing such a diabolical thing to another human being unless you can convince them that what you were doing was righteous and that the people that you were beating it into were less than? So it took it took them, they had to manipulate everybody in order to accept that institution, right?
Yeah.
So now what you've done is you've taken individuals and you committed the worst crime known to humanity against someone. And now you've sent them through almost 3 centuries of enslavement. You've literally built a nation. And the only reason that America has been successful is because of slavery. If America had not been engaged in slavery, let's just assume that they had white workers, right? That just worked and tore the land themselves. I don't believe for one bit that America would have been the nation that it's become, right? It would have never made that way because there would have been the Civil War would not have been fought over slavery. The Civil War would have been fought over something else.
Yeah.
So the whole idea is that we're only here today primarily because of the institution of slavery. If you take the institution of slavery, that's the most constant thing in American history, is the enslavement and the mistreatment of black people. From the day before that a European set foot on this continent till today, there's only been one thing that's been consistent, and that is the mistreatment of black people.
Yeah.
Period. There's nothing else that you can even compare it to. I know that people love to try to justify things in their head, right? My grandfather once told me that there's 2 sides to everybody: who you are and who you want to be. And most people think they are who they want to be, but they're not. These people, they're not that. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. When I was a kid, I was never like blown away by the fact that there were people who owned slaves. I was blown away by the fact that you had people who allowed it to happen. Right? You know what I'm saying? You might not have been personally involved, but you was an accessory.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You could say, you know what? I didn't do anything to slaves. I didn't own any slaves, but you're benefiting from it. Yeah. Anytime you benefit from a crime, you're going to go to prison. Yeah. So if you're living in this country and you're benefiting from a crime such as slavery, and you say, I never owned any slaves, I've never done anything bad to a black person, I didn't live during slavery, but you don't acknowledge that you're benefiting from it, you're an accessory.
Black people in this country have been oppressed for over 400 years. 400 years, centuries.
Right.
And we're still seeing these issues kind of be present in our societies.
Right.
And in that, I like that you mentioned in a way that it's in this American nightmare, the identity of the African American individual has been deconstructed, so much so that they are not prideful in their identity in a way. Right. And I guess we can delve into your last pillar, the last pillar of this book, where you talk about pride.
Right.
Is that how you connected in a way?
It encompassed the issue of values. The one thing that I'm also very concerned about in our community is that I always tell people that I'm from a place called Shelbyville, Tennessee. And I was born in a single parent household. And my mother worked 2 jobs, and I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. And being there, we lived on this street. There was probably no less than maybe 15, 20 homes. And in every house on that street, which were all African American, there was a man and a woman in that house taking care of their children. Right? So the future of our people is going to heavily weigh on our commitment to being parents and taking care of our children. If you really look, I mean, I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm hard on people that don't take care of their children. I'm hard. You're not going to get a lot of, that's my bias. You're not going to get a lot of sympathy or empathy out of me if you're not taking care of your children. I get it. Everybody is not going to be able to be in a relationship that's going to work. You know, mom and dad may not make it. But that does not change the fact that you have to make taking care of your children a priority. In every reliable study, a person who has both parents in their life will have a much better chance of succeeding and less likely to get involved in many of the ills that we have going on in our community. Granted, if you look at prior to the Civil Rights Act, the being born out of wedlock was a whole less likely than today. And what happened prior to that time that's different? You know what I mean? I mean, obviously one of them is the expansion of the prison industrial complex and mass incarceration, which are generally, black men getting very long sentences. And if you're doing that, if you have this area during the Reagan era where you saw the explosion of the crack epidemic, which was in many ways part and parcel of a policy, as well as the CIA funneling drugs into the black community, and the people who are getting hooked on crack, and because of situations with regards to the economics, people are selling crack, and people getting much larger sentences for possessing or selling crack as opposed to cocaine, because crack was really a black and brown drug. Yeah. Make no mistake about it, it was just cheap cocaine. You don't see that time going out for prescription drugs or methamphetamine either. So the policy and the ways that the sentencings were different. So people were getting these long sentences, going away, and the community was just, you pulled the productive African Americans out of the community during the after the Civil Rights Act. You left the weakest in the community, and out of the weakest out of the community, then you're taking those individuals out, and it just weakened. So, we do have to start focusing on parenting and, men being in the home, because although I grew up in a single parent household, I had those examples. You know what I mean? I mean, I had people that were there. I knew exactly what I wanted, and I knew from my grandparents and other individuals exactly who I want. And another thing too is that we also have to change, when I talk about the issue of values, is that money is important, and make no mistake about it. But there's a difference between money and economics. You know what I mean? I mean, you can have money and have no power. You know what I mean? Or have no value. Sure. I mean, if you sell your souls to the devil, then, there's nothing there. So we have to begin to start understanding the whole idea of, we have to look, sometimes we're short-sighted and we don't think collectively. And so when you're doing the type of economics where you're not really thinking about the bigger picture, then what happens is that, sometimes the two conflict with each other. It's more important to be poor and have values than to be rich and don't have values. Because if money in and of itself was to be the end all to be all, then you would not see the things that are happening to people who do have money, right? I mean, it's like there's a large number of billionaires, and I've said this in our last time, that kill themselves, right? Sure. So if money doesn't change that, so we have to focus on our values and the pride in what we were able to accomplish. And part of what we were able to accomplish as black people is the fact that, we're not just people of African descent. We're the strongest of the Africans because we survived the Middle Passage, we survived slavery, we survived, the convict lease system, we survived Jim Crow, the civil rights, we survived all of that. So there's much to be said about that because nobody else can do that. And I think that in essence comes where we have to deal with the fact that people do not hate us. They fear us. They fear who you will become. That's what they're fearful of. And we have to understand that.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
I've never seen nobody throw shade at nobody. You know what I mean? People throw shade at somebody.
True.
And so I think that oftentimes what they're fearful of is that, they understand that if we were to ever get in a position where we build up our economic base, we begin to start focusing on the family, we begin to start voting collectively, and we begin to start dealing and packing these juries, they got a problem.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. It's not necessarily that black people are going to take you out of power. It's that there's going to be a paradigm shift in this country.
Yeah.
And social order is going to change.
True. And like you say, I think it's truly informational that you suggest a collective strategy for such an intersectional issue in our system. It's a systematic issue, and you're not only coming with a single solution, but rather a set of solutions that have for so long not been implemented. And you, with your expertise as an attorney, as a past police officer, somebody who served in the military, So with that, Mr. Ali, thank you so much for lending us your time. We really appreciate it, and we're truly honored to have had this interview with you with regards to your new book called When the Jury, Money Votes, and Pride Come Black. Thank you so much for this instructive and really informative discussion. And for all of those of you, thank you so much for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you tune in as well to our Sunday segments with Justice Watch Radio with attorney Zulu Ali. For more information, you can log on to justicewatchradio.com. Thank you so much for everything.
Over the past 25 years, I've had the privilege of interviewing and highlighting some truly interesting people. I mean, everyone who is anyone, both the famous and the infamous, from presidents and their first ladies to kings and queens, movie stars and pop stars, captains of industry, heads of state, sports personalities, innovative entrepreneurs, and some pretty fascinating everyday people. Today, I am proud to introduce you to Zulu Ali, an attorney and activist who hopes to build a legal legacy that he can pass on to his children and grandchildren, but also a legacy that will go beyond and inspire and motivate others. Mr. Ali, or should I say colleague, it's such a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. It's definitely a pleasure to meet you and to be here as well.
So, Counselor, clearly you have devoted your entire life to law enforcement, serving as a police officer first, turned attorney. What made you choose this path for yourself?
Well, actually, becoming an attorney was actually my original passion, has always been a passion of mine. I'm originally from Shelbyville, Tennessee, which is about 60 miles south of Nashville.
You know, I love a country boy. I'm a country girl. I'm from North Carolina.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So, and I was raised in a single parent home. And so I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. Mm-hmm. And my grandfather, A.D. Reynolds, he was a janitor. He actually cleaned law offices. And one day when I was probably maybe about 7 or 8 years old, he took me to work with him. And the name of the law office that he was cleaning, it was an attorney by the name of Tyrus Cobb. And he took me into the law library and he introduced me to Attorney Cobb. He said, "This is my grandson. He's going to be the next Avon Williams." And Avon Williams is a really great civil rights lawyer out of Nashville. And in fact, he's the cousin of Thurgood Marshall. And then Attorney Cobb, told me about how great of an attorney Avon Williams was, and Z. Alexander Luby and Thurgood Marshall, and how they changed the world. And I left there that day thinking, that's what I wanted to do. But life takes its course. I become a police officer, and one day I'm in probate court. Wow. And the judge in probate court was actually the attorney that my grandfather had introduced me to 20 years earlier. And when he called my case, he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet the next Avon Williams." And he, told me how great of a man my grandfather was and how proud. My grandfather actually had passed away when I was in the military. So told me about how great of a man my grandfather was. And I got extremely emotional and decided that I was going to go back to school and pursue, my original dream of becoming an attorney. And I did that.
Just as your grandfather had predicted. And speaking of your work in the military, I understand that you actually served in the United States Marine Corps. So what was that experience like?
It was a very, I learned a lot being in the Marine Corps. It's actually something I'm extremely proud of, my service in the Marine Corps. My MOS, I was an infantryman, but I spent the majority of my career in the Marine Security Forces, serving at at Pearl Harbor in the Marine barracks there. And it was a great experience. I learned a lot about myself, a lot about discipline, met some really great men and women that I served with, colleagues that I still have contacts with today. And it also inspired me. I have actually here in California a veterans legal clinic where we assist military veterans as well as active duty military personnel with legal matters, at no cost here at the office. So the Marine Corps and military definitely has a very special place in my heart. So definitely it was a great experience for me.
And I have to imagine it helped you with team building because together with your daughter, you now run the largest Black-owned law firm in California's Inland Empire. So thinking about your variety of experiences, what are the benefits of having such strong business partnerships with a family member since you have been working under the auspices of your grandfather's prediction all these years?
Right. Yeah. It's great. I mean, having my daughter, her name is Whitney Ali, and she's been with me for a few years now, working, alongside. I mean, that's very special to have my daughter here with me. I mean, she actually, with law being a second career for me, she was able to see me go through my undergraduate education, graduate education, and building the firm. So she was able to see that. And so that's, she talks about that a lot, and it's very special, for her. But it's just great having a daughter and someone who can, carry on, that legacy. I'm an old Southern boy, so being a lawyer is something special and something great, something that you can do to change things, to challenge things. And that's what we focus on, is trying to challenge the courts when we feel that it's necessary, and strive to make changes in the law when the law is unjust, and to have a team of people with you that share that same passion. It's a great thing.
And speaking of making those kinds of incremental changes, obviously the culture in our country manifests itself sometime in that change. As a matter of fact, I know that what was going on within our Black and brown communities, stop and frisk amongst law enforcement, really inspired you to create the Stop and Frisk Academy. Why don't you talk me through what its purpose is and how did you come to start it?
All right. So back in, I believe it was maybe 2014 is when we initially started the Stop and Frisk Academy. And it's always just been something that I've definitely been inspired to do. And one of the things I remember that I was concerned with a lot of the things that we've already known as far as Black and brown people, the experiences that we were dealing with when it comes to law enforcement. I was just frustrated. I remember one night and I had a dream, about my grandmother, and I was just frustrated. I mean, just frustrated about dealing with the system and dealing with, the problems, of course, that you have not only in the streets, but oftentimes that you have in the courts. And so anyway, so I have this dream and I get up and I just woke up with this just desire and a passion to really do something to help make a difference for both young men and women. That's kind of the things that I like to focus on, is mentoring young men and women. And a friend of mine who actually had a mentoring program, I touched bases with him and we got together and we put together this program called Stop and Frisk, where we, at least on a monthly basis, we bring in young men and women, primarily from the inner city and from at-risk communities. We just bring them in and we teach them. We spend a lot of time talking about how to deal with police encounters, how to deal with issues of the criminal justice system, how to avoid falling into the traps of the criminal justice system. And we teach them other things, such as, we provide them with information about career, educational, leadership skills, time management skills, whatever we can do to, what I often say is to kind of stay out of the way and to be progressive. But it's a very, and we've been doing this every month, except during the pandemic, of course, we stopped, but a couple of months we started again with the program. And we also take the kids out to, see movies. We'll bring them to just different places for them to see that anything is possible, despite, the issues and the problems. And it's just, something that I love to do. And it's just a program that is is really near and dear to me.
I see that your work has taken you not just for community activism and changes in the laws, and then also teaching people how to navigate around the justice system. But I also understand you do some work in international law. Tell me about that.
I do. Right before the pandemic, I was on the list of counsel at the International Criminal Court at The Hague. And started to get involved in doing a little work with representing witnesses as well as individuals who are involved or are accused of crimes at the International Criminal Court. Mm-hmm. We actually had opened up an office actually in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, like I said, this was probably right before the pandemic, and so we're trying to get back into that. But that's kind of what primarily my international practice is focusing on, the International Criminal Court. And we also do a lot of international work with individuals who are seeking asylum, because I do immigration work as well. So a lot of people who are trying to come to the country as refugees, as well as individuals who are in the country and fearful of going back to their countries of origin. We do asylum cases, and we, as well as relief under the Convention Against Torture as well.
Black man's religion, Islam or Christianity. When I read that title, I immediately said, let me see if I can go on Amazon and get this, because I know my nephews would love to read that. So right. Talk me through what this book is about.
Well, this book is a book that I wrote after I had went to Mecca. This was back in 1997, and I had taken the Hajj, the pilgrimage. And so when I came back, I actually wrote the book. Primarily, the book is focused more on the Unitarianism, of God, and I kind of like compared the two. But what was really special about that was the first book that I wrote, and it actually is in the Library of Congress. And it was one of the books that it was owned by one of my favorite people and the civil rights icon, Rosa Parks, as part of Rosa Parks Papers. And that's the reason why I really, the fact that someone that I hold in such, high esteem and have so much respect for would even consider even owning a book that I wrote. That's the reason, honestly, that I really, I'm very proud of that. That's very proud, a proud moment for me to know that was something that she owned.
As well you should be, counselor, as well you should be. As I hear you talk me through your story professionally and personally, it is very clear that family has been the foundation of who you are as a man and as a professional. So what role do you think family has played in your personal and professional career?
Everything. I mean, my family, basically, part of it, beginning with my mother, who I said was a single parent who, raised me. She worked 2 jobs. She gave me everything that I wanted and everything that I needed. And, she was mom and dad to me. And, she's, just a hero, watching her and what she had to go through and what she gave me. My mother's, is responsible. Whatever I have, I mean, that's the face you have to see, because she's the one that's responsible for all of it. So I give everything, to my mother. My wife, I've been married for, 35 years, and since I was 19 years old. And so she's always been there with me and supported me in everything that I did. And then, we have 4 daughters that are grown now, but, they also, are very proud of me. Having children that are proud of you is also important. So they continue to inspire me. And, being a grandfather now as well, I actually have 4 grandchildren. So that's also inspiration. And even going back to, my grandparents, my grandfather, who, was a janitor. And, that's, just to think that, my grandfather was cleaning law offices. And today I own a law office. And so, that's, it just speaks volumes to, what happens when you have people who inspire you. And he inspired me as a man. He was a great family man. He, took care of his family. And so, he touched me in that way as well. I knew what it took to be a man, because I was able to watch a man, be a man. So that's really important to me. So yeah, family is everything.
Well, it's so very clear you had that strong mother, that wonderful, strong wife, and you've become the ultimate girl dad, because those women have showed you exactly how women are supposed to be treated, because they have raised an amazing man. Counselor, it's been a pleasure to chat with you. I want to make sure that you convey what's the one thing you'd like the viewer of this video feature to walk away with, because the work that you have done will last for an extremely long time, much past your life and my life, and I do think will inspire others.
Unfortunately, we still live in a time that, the way that you look, sometimes, people are going to, I guess, as they say in the streets, I mean, there's a lot of haters,
right?
And people who, hate your success, and people who may not want you to be successful. But I just want to inspire people that to go out and to fight and struggle, to do, to be the best you that you possibly can be, and to not allow anyone to stand in your way or try to prevent you from, what's yours, and to realize the greatness in you, and that's what I hope people take away from it, is that you can still, regardless. I mean, you're going to run into challenges. People are going to hate on you, and people are going to try to hold you down. But keep fighting, and you will be successful ultimately.
And since you brought up what is a saying in the streets, let me go ahead and add to that. You are telling folk to let your haters be your motivators.
That's right. Absolutely.
That's what our mamas would say to us. Your haters, your
Right.
motivators.
Absolutely.
So, sir, you have just been a delight. There's nothing I like more than talking to my colleagues and finding out what inspired them to find their purpose in the law. The law has always been the great equalizer for me.
Right.
The possibility exists for justice, and I just admire those who work tirelessly every single day to make that happen for others. Thank you, sir.
You're on board KCAA's Inland Talk Express.